Hey, welcome back. Quick question. Do you remember a time before the internet, but you also can't imagine your life without it? Did you have a childhood with no cell phone, but then get your first one in college? Did you own a Walkman and an iPod? Do you feel too cynical to be an optimistic millennial, but too adaptable to be a jaded Gen Z? If any of that hit you, you might be a Xennial. And today we're going deep on the psychology behind this fascinating microgeneration. Why they think the way they do, how their unique upbringing shaped their identity, relationships, and mental health, and why understanding them might actually tell us something profound about all of us. Let's get into it. Xennials, sometimes called the Oregon Trail generation, are a microgeneration sandwiched between Generation X and Millennials, born roughly between 1976 and 1985. They're not quite enough of either to feel fully represented by both. Sociologists like Dan Woodman at the University of Melbourne were among the first to formally identify this group. His argument was simple but powerful. The experience of growing up analog and then coming of age digital created a psychologically distinct cohort. Think about it. A Gen Z born in 1965 was already in their late 20s when the internet became a household thing. A millennial born in 1990 grew up with it from childhood. But a Xennial? They straddled both worlds at exactly the right or wrong time. They learned cursive. They also learned to code. They passed notes in class. They also discovered AIM chat. They had a childhood of boredom and unstructured play, and an adulthood of infinite digital stimulation. This dual experience is the psychological foundation of everything we're about to talk about. Start at the beginning, because childhood is where personality is built. Xennials grew up in what psychologists would call a low-surveillance childhood. Parents were not helicopter parents. Kids left the house in the morning and came back at dinner. Nobody knew exactly where you were, and that was normal. This kind of unstructured, unsupervised play is something developmental psychologists like Peter Gray have written extensively about. It builds intrinsic motivation, risk tolerance, conflict resolution skills, and a strong internal locus of control, the belief that you are responsible for what happens to you. Xennials, as a result, tend to be remarkably self-reliant. They're problem solvers. They figure things out. They don't wait to be told what to do. When something breaks, they fix it. When there's no map, they make one. There's also something worth noting about boredom. Xennials were bored. Magnificently, profoundly bored. And boredom, real boredom, not scrolling through your phone boredom, is actually the birthplace of creativity. Neuroscientists have found that the default mode network in the brain, activated during boredom, is deeply linked to imagination, self-reflection, and creative thinking. Xennials daydreamed. They invented games. They wrote stories in notebooks. Nobody asked them to write. That creative muscle got built early and strong. But it wasn't all idyllic. The 1980s were also a time of economic volatility, the crack epidemic, rising divorce rates, and the early AIDS crisis. Many Xennials were latchkey kids, coming home to empty houses while both parents worked. That independence came with a side of emotional self-sufficiency that sometimes tips into avoidance of vulnerability. This is a key psychological trait. Xennials learned early that you handle your own problems, which is a superpower, until it becomes a wall. Now here's where Xennials become truly fascinating. Most generations either grew up digital or didn't. Xennials became digital in real time as adults or near adults, and that process of adaptation, of consciously learning an entirely new way of living, became a core part of who they are. Psychologists talk about something called cognitive flexibility, the ability to shift thinking strategies, adapt to new information, and move fluidly between different mental frameworks. Xennials had to develop this in a way no previous generation did because the world itself changed format on them midlife. They are, as a result, remarkable translators. They can speak the language of older generations, patience, formality, face-to-face communication, and the language of younger ones. Digital fluency, irony, memes. They're the bilingual ambassadors of human history. At work, this shows up as adaptability. Xennials are rarely the ones panicking when a new system rolls out. They've already lived through the transition from typewriters to word processors, from physical maps to GPS, from CDs to streaming. Change doesn't scare them the way it scares Gen X. It's just Tuesday. But here's the psychological cost of that adaptability, identity ambiguity. Because Xennials belong to two worlds, they sometimes feel they belong to neither. You'll hear them say things like, I don't really relate to millennials, but I'm not really a Gen Zer either. There's a subtle sense of being in between, not just generationally, but existentially. Psychologically, this mirrors what identity theorist Erik Erikson described as identity diffusion, a lack of a clear, consolidated self-narrative. Not a crisis exactly, but a quiet uncertainty. Where do I fit? This can manifest as a tendency to be chameleons, adapting so well to every room they walk into that sometimes they lose track of who they are when the room is empty. Let's talk about how Xennials actually feel, because this is where it gets really interesting. Xennials are often described as having a unique emotional stance. They're not the cynical, detached Gen Xers who grew up under the shadow of corporate greed and disillusionment. And they're not the everyone gets a trophy idealism sometimes attributed to early millennials. There's something in between. People who want to believe things will work out but have receipts proving that sometimes they don't. Call it optimistic realism or realistic hope. This actually makes Xennials psychologically resilient. Research on resilience consistently shows that the most emotionally durable people aren't the ones who expect everything to be fine. They're the ones who acknowledge difficulty and believe in their own ability to navigate it. That's the Xennial sweet spot. Xennials are also deeply nostalgic, arguably more than any other living generation. And this isn't just sentimentality. Psychologically, nostalgia serves important functions. Research by Konstantin Sedikades at the University of Southampton shows that nostalgia increases feelings of social connectedness, boosts self-continuity, the sense that you have a coherent story across time, and even reduces existential anxiety. For Xennials, who watch their entire cultural landscape transform, nostalgia is a way of anchoring identity. The mixtape, the smell of a video store, Saturday morning cartoons, these aren't just memories, they're psychological anchor points. Now, Xennials were raised in an era when emotional expression, especially for men, was not exactly encouraged. The therapeutic culture that has become mainstream today wasn't yet in full swing. You dealt with things. You moved on. As a result, many Xennials carry a tendency toward emotional self-sufficiency that can strain relationships. They're great in a crisis. They're less great at saying, I'm not okay. Therapy has been transformative for many Xennials precisely because it gave them, perhaps for the first time, permission to be struggling. Xennials hit the job market in the late 1990s and early 2000s, a period that included both the dot-com boom and its catastrophic bust, and then September 11th, and then the 2008 financial crisis. They've been economically knocked around more than almost any other group. Psychologically, this creates a complex relationship with financial security. Many Xennials feel perpetually behind. They expected the linear career trajectory their parents had, and instead got a rug-pulled economy 3 times over. This can manifest as chronic low-grade financial anxiety, even when they're objectively doing fine. At the same time, their work ethic is formidable. They were raised to show up, to do the job, to not complain. This makes them invaluable in professional settings, but also vulnerable to burnout because they were never really taught that the job has limits. In relationships, Xennials came of age romantically before dating apps, which means they know what it means to meet someone at a party, to pass a note, to wait by the phone. They understand romantic patience in a way that younger generations sometimes struggle with, but they also watched the marriage paradigm of their parents crumble. The divorce rates of the 70s and 80s were historic. Many were children of divorce, and that leaves psychological marks, attachment anxiety, fear of abandonment, a sometimes unconscious belief that relationships are temporary. The result is a generation that wants deep connection, works hard for it, but sometimes holds back just enough to protect themselves. Okay, let's end on something powerful, because for all the ambiguity and in-betweenness and economic whiplash, Xennials have something genuinely extraordinary. They're the last humans to have lived fully on both sides of the digital divide. That is not a small thing. That is a historical singularity. They know what it means to be bored without a phone. They know what it means to wait for a letter. They know what it means to get lost and have to figure it out. And they also know what it means to video call someone across the world, to access the sum of human knowledge in their pocket, to build a business from a laptop in their kitchen. This gives them a perspective that is increasingly rare and increasingly valuable. In a world that is moving faster than any human system was designed to handle, the people who remember before are the ones who can ask, should we? Not just can we. Xennials are, in many ways, the most psychologically complete generation alive, carrying the emotional richness of an analog childhood and the adaptive skills of a digital adulthood. So if you're a Xennial, I hope this gave you some language for things you've maybe always felt but never quite had the words for. The in-betweenness, the nostalgia, the self-reliance that sometimes isolates you, the adaptability that is, genuinely, a gift. And if you're not a Xennial, maybe you know one, maybe you love one, and maybe now you understand them a little bit better. Drop in the comments what part of this resonated most with you. I read every single one. If this video helped you think differently about your own psychology or your generation, share it with someone who'd get it, and subscribe if you want more deep dives like this. I'll see you in the next one.